So thank you, Ephrat. That was an extraordinary way to start. What joy that we need to feel. I'm so delighted to be here this evening and want to just thank the Guggenheim Works in Process program for all they do. So that she can catch her breath, I'm going to give you a little context about Ephrat Asherie. She is a Barnard College Italian Studies major turned house dancer and B-girl turned dance ethnographer, researcher, choreographer, and she makes work like no one else. It doesn't look like anything you've seen before because she draws on so many different genres, on so much research, and on the brilliance of her dancers and all that they bring. So Ephrat Asherie Dance had its company debut at the Pillow in 2013. She has gone on to make a whole host of works, and this is one that we're very excited about. We've been investing in this project since 2016 when we had our very first residency with Ephrat. And then in September, she actually inaugurated the new Pillow Lab, which is a new center for research and development in dance at the Pillow that happens from September through May. And then 2 weeks ago, together with our partner, the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art in North Adams, she had a full technical residency to further develop this piece. I'm also pleased to announce that she is the inaugural winner of the new Jacob's Pillow Fellowship at the Tillis Center at LIU Post. So, that's just a little bit about how much we care about this artist at Jacob's Pillow. I also want to acknowledge someone who was the person who said, you know Ephrat Asherie, the dancer, of course. She is the astonishing dancer from the Michelle Dorrance Company, who is one that rarely, if ever, wears tap shoes. But do you know her work as a choreographer? And frankly, I hadn't really investigated it until he told me to. He was most recently, before he retired, the director of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. He led the New England Foundation for the Arts, and from 1990 to 1994, he was director of Jacob's Pillow. He was my great colleague and my mentor, Sam Miller. And so I just want to acknowledge him in this space. He had a way of pulling a total dance ecology together in support of an artist's work, and I know he did that for Ephrat, so I think it's really fitting that we acknowledge him this week and acknowledge that great spirit in the room. So with that, I want to turn to Ephrat and just ask her, where did the genesis of Odeon come from?
Well, first, I want to say a really big thank you, Pam. That was very kind of you to say. And I just want to acknowledge that the Pillow has been in many ways, and I feel that Pam, especially a little angel on my shoulder, kind of like I'm a baby bird. They've been, especially Pam, guiding me. And so I really appreciate that. And interestingly enough, the first collaboration, you guys can hear me okay? You could talk, you could make some noise, okay. The first collaboration I did with my brother Ehud, who will be on the panel next, don't worry, was through the program that Sam Miller began called Extended Life. I was lucky enough to be a part of that program in the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, and part of that program is a commission for the River to River Festival. So that was also part of my graduate research for my thesis, which looked at the vernacular roots, jazz dance roots of breaking hip hop and house. So my brother and I collaborated. It was a jazz quartet and 6 dancers. And so Sam saw that work, and that was the work that he, that's why he mentioned me to Pam. So I feel like the two of them kind of really so profoundly impacted my career as an artist. And so I want to honor Sam, because he's no longer with us, and Pam for all of that support. It's no small thing. So yeah, this first collaboration with my brother went surprisingly well, because sometimes sibling collaborations can go not so well, or they can go really well. So this one went well. And it was great, because Ehud actually was very enthusiastic about what's the next collaboration. I was like, we did it, good, one day. We did it. And he was like, okay, what's next? So that was really exciting. And he mentioned to me this composer, Ernesto Nazareth. Now, I would always go to my brother's gigs, and there was always this one, he'd be playing a lot of beautiful kind of standard jazz stuff, and then there'd be something he'd pop in that sounded a little like samba. And I was like, what's that samba stuff you play? I really like that. He's like, oh, that's Nazareth. And he said it to me for many years. And then when this opportunity came up, or like we did our first collaboration and it went well, he said, what about Nazareth? And I said, okay. And so I started listening to more and more of the music, and pretty quickly it became apparent that like, oh yeah.
I actually said
no. No. Do you see what I mean about the going well and not going? Hey, come up here, come on. He was gonna come to the next panel to talk about the music, but let's go. No. This is how I remember it, so let's hear the other side of the story.
After our first collaboration, I didn't say, what's next? I said, for our next piece, we have to do something with Nazareth.
Okay. So Ehud has a great
I insisted about it, because I knew it would be a great idea. That's so, just to clear that up.
Okay. Can you remember to come to rehearsal on time? No, just kidding. You knew that stuff was coming. No, okay. No, but the point was that it was like to me it felt amazingly wonderful that he was so enthusiastic. He was so committed to Nazareth, and once I heard more of the music, I was totally in love with it. And I'll just give you, like, this is works in process, so you get, like, inside scoop, right? So I'm going to give you this one little story. So Ehud told me to listen to a bunch of this music. And the first piece of music that you heard was a tune called Brejeiro. And when I heard it, I actually listened to it on YouTube, a version on YouTube, and I didn't realize it was a sped-up version because of copyright laws. So I actually choreographed it to this like really up-tempo version, which kind of spawned this part of our collaboration where it's like, okay, so how much do we change the music from its traditional essence? Some pieces Ehud plays exactly like they were written, other pieces we kind of take some liberty. And that's been a really interesting part of the collaboration. Interesting is a word that I use loosely. No, but like that has been one of the great kind of blessings to work with these incredible musicians and to see how that can shift, you know?
And can you talk a little bit about your movement vocabulary, Ephrat? Where does it come from? Where do you start?
Yeah, so like Pam mentioned, I'm a B-girl and house dancer, hip-hop dancer. I'm really, really fortunate to be part of the New York underground club scene, which is like one of the most beautiful, utopic, sort of tolerant spaces I've ever been in. And you see everything. So, you know, although I started with breaking, when I got into house, then I was seeing all styles. I was seeing house, I was seeing whacking, I was seeing voguing, I was seeing people from everywhere in the world connecting, you know, using a lot of their cultural background, whether it, you know, West African movement, dances from the Caribbean. So already I was exposed to sort of a hybridity in movement just going to the club. And I think that really influenced my work as an artist profoundly.
And how did you decide to take that excitement, that experience, and put it on the concert stage? What led you to want to put it there?
I feel really short in this chair. I want to acknowledge that, so I know you're thinking it.
You want to take the microphone off? You can do that, yeah.
Public speaking isn't my forte. Okay. Yeah, so one of the things that was so exciting to me about this music and that Ehud and I talked about a lot was the way that it embodies this classical European influence, like Chopin vibe of the early 20th century, and all this Afro-Brazilian popular music, like folk music. So my dance background is sort of parallel to that in the sense that, you know, I grew up taking ballet class and then modern, but I was always a hip hop fan. So I was listening to hip hop growing up in the 90s, which is the golden era of hip hop. So, you know, that to me like made a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And so actually I was at a festival at Duke, American Dance Festival, and I saw Rennie Harris' Pure Movement. If you guys are familiar with Rennie's work, he's like a pioneer in hip-hop dance theater, and he did a hip-hop version of Romeo and Juliet, and I saw that and I said, that like combines everything I love. Hip-hop, the theater, performance, sort of, yeah, just playing with all these different elements that you might not get to necessarily develop in the social setting where these dancers are from. And that is really exciting to me because I'm not trying to ever replicate those social environments, the street or the club or a breaking jam, rather like show the complexities of these forms and sort of the inherent narrative qualities that they have, because I feel they're so, yeah, I don't know, they evoke so much of like a human story of resilience that I think they're really compelling. And yeah, I feel very lucky that I found the community that I found, and specifically, like, same thing with the dancers that I work with. It's very they move me all as very individual artists, and that's part of the reason I like to make work, and I like to make work with them.
And I'm interested in sort of how did you decide for this piece, what was the criteria for the dancers that you picked? Because they're all so different.
I know, aren't they so good? Just wait. Oh yeah, I just really love them dearly. So we all know each other from the club setting. I think Linda and I have been a crew for 10 years. Mega used to come to our crew practices all the time. Miss V, we danced, 15 years ago. We met dancing with Buddha Stretch, hip hop pioneer. Omari and I battled. I think we battled. That's how we met. So, yeah, so we all kind of really speak that language, but we also have the passion for the creative process. So we have that patience to come and really rehearse, out of something that might lead to nothing or something that might lead to something great, right? And so that I think is a specific sort of personality that will also tolerate that kind of process,
And how do you make that transition from, let's say, battling and the individual to something that has to be such an ensemble?
Well, that's a little bit where the difference between sort of the street dance vibe of breaking or hip hop, how it's different from the club vibe. So the club, especially house, is really about the collective consciousness and how the individual has his or her uniqueness and a voice because he or she is supported by the collective. So in that sense, like I said, house is a utopia, and the house anthem is you may be black, you may be white, you may be Jew or Gentile, but it makes no difference in our house. That's an old school house track from the early 80s. So for me, that idea of community is is essential, and especially now in the world we live in, I think finding ways to connect together is absolutely the thing to do, and I feel we can really do that and share that through this movement.
Great. So I'm so excited to see the next excerpt. Can you just give us a sense of the arc of the piece? Where did the section we've seen, where does that fall? And the one we're going to see, where will that fall in the ultimate production that will premiere at Jacob's Pillow?
June 27th. Yeah, so you're actually seeing it kind of chronologically. You saw the very beginning portion, and then we're going to go into what follows immediately after. And then there's a chunk that we're leaving out. Because it is works in process. You'll have to come to the pillow to see the whole thing. And then we're giving you the finale.
Okay.
So you are seeing something chronologically, at least in this stage, that's sort of where, how the piece develops.
And scenically, what will it look like in terms of musicians, dancers?
Yeah. So one of the things that maybe you won't get to experience so much today is this idea that dancers and the blur in the line between dancers and musicians. Is that what you're asking me? Yeah. That's something that's actually, I was really inspired by my work with Michelle Dorrance, because tap dancers I find to be so incredible because they're both dancers and musicians in one. So I was like, oh, what would that feel like? How does it feel to make sound on stage? How do we sort of really, because we are nothing as dancers without the musicians. It's a game changer to have live musicians. Can we give it up for the musicians too? We're very spoiled. When we rehearse with a recording when they're out of town, it's but yeah, so that's something that we're in development with, and that'll be part of the larger work, sort of how we become musicians and they become dancers.
Awesome. Oh, my goodness. Oh, wonderful. Gosh.
I told you they were good. Right.
Excellent. So we get Ehud Asherie now.
I had to butt in before. I'm sorry.
No, that was perfect. It's work in process. You see the process. You know what I'm saying? It's good. We interrupt each other, too. That's the other thing. Might have noticed.
So we'll let Ephrat catch her breath a little, and I'm going to ask Ehud, tell me a little bit about your background and about this family of artists that you have here.
Well, where do you start? So, well, I've been mainly the last 20 years, wow, that went by fast, mainly working as a jazz pianist in New York City. And, thanks to my mom, I had piano lessons when I was a kid, and even though I wanted to stop because I wasn't into it, she forced me, and I have her to thank. Seriously, I tell the story all the time. So I tell the story all the time. If it wasn't for her, I would have, she. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
And so generally, as a jazz pianist in New York, we play Brazilian music is part of our repertoire in terms of like bossa nova and stuff like, Antonio Carlos Jobim and Jorge Gilberto. Those songs are part of the repertoire, Desafinado, The Girl from Ipanema, and all that stuff. So I always played some form of Brazilian music. And, then I got interested, and much like my taste in jazz, I tend to look backwards all the time for inspiration. And then I discovered, of course, before bossa nova, there was samba, and samba canção, which is like their kind of, their songs where they had crooners singing. That would be a good comparison. And then before all that comes this music, which is actually a written piano music, and often it's kind of the parallels made between Nazareth and Scott Joplin, because they were both kind of incubators, and they put down on paper these sounds that were going on, and they were like, these different influences they had going on at the time. Although Nazareth was much more of a prolific composer. He wrote over 200 pieces, and very varied and wide in scope, as you're going to see in the next excerpt. And I think what I really like about Nazareth, what speaks to me, is that he's in his time and he's not in his time at the same time. He's a composer that's like, you can't say it's popular music, but then you can't say it's classical music, but then popular musicians play his music, and so do classical musicians. So he's in this weird position, and I think I can kind of relate to that in a lot of levels. Just Fred and I were born in Israel, but then we grew up in Italy, and then we came to New York when I was 8. When I was 8, she was 6. So there's something about like, this, you don't know where you are, and there's all these different influences, and I think I really hear that in the music, and I think that's why I gravitate towards his music.
That's great, thank you. So Ephrat, what is it that you saw in Nazareth when Ehud said, let's do Nazareth?
I immediately wanted to dance to it, so I knew that was a really good sign. Also, I think, like Ehud, I'm sort of interested in things that don't seem to fit, right? Maybe because of our background, but I'm also a Gemini, so,
That's a good sign.
It's sort of just like things that seem to be extremely opposite. I find maybe it's just the way like I'm trying to reconcile my being. Like I want things to make sense, and for some reason, this doesn't seem strange to me that some of this stuff sounds so classical, but it's rooted in this Afro-Brazilian, these Afro-Brazilian rhythms, right? So it's like pre-samba. Some of the rhythms you hear are machixe, or this very quintessential Brazilian music called choro. So that first section you saw in the beginning, it's like that clapping game. Yeah. Sergio, our pandeiro player, who we collaborated with really closely as well, he was explaining to me like the root, like the fundamental rhythmic root of choro, which is that one and one, one and one, and like just that on and off beat. And then that's a kid's game that, Brazilian children play. And he showed it to me, and I was like, oh, I love it. Let's like figure, because to me also in creating the piece, I love the music so much, but I was like, how do we tell the story of how this music and this rhythm kind of like gets into our being and makes us want to move, and those like rhythmic cells are really a big part of that, combined with all that melodic stuff. So one of the pieces that you're going to see in the next excerpt is actually a waltz, and it sounds like so quintessentially classical too, but it's still Nazareth, right? So him straddling sort of these two worlds, like what is like folk music in a certain way, Brazilian folk music, and we're talking about music from like the early, like the first two pieces that you heard, I think, were composed in 1910, Brejeiro, and... No,
Brejeiro is actually 1893.
Hey. Yeah, 1893, and Odeon is 1910.
Odeon is 1910, yeah.
Okay.
The other thing, too, is that, I just want to mention is that Sergio did a really great job, and you'll see this more at the pillow, that there's almost like these rhythmic excerpts and units that he kind of composed, and a lot of them, they're like little cells that a lot of them come from the pieces themselves, and then they're being replicated. Obviously, they're being replicated by the musicians because we're playing these rhythms, but the dancers themselves are also dancing these rhythms and stomping the rhythms and clapping the rhythms. So that's another kind of the, you know, the merging of the two worlds where they're playing off each other.
Yeah, and I was really, can I continue?
Yes, please.
Okay. And I also really
Should I go get the hook?
I also really wanted to understand, like, why am I so compelled by this music? So in the distilling of all these rhythms, it's not an excerpt that you're going to see today, but there is, well, you'll see the finale, this piece called Batuki. When Sergio took, like, the fundamental rhythmic, like, cells, we calling them this, of that tune, I heard this, like, dance hall track from the 90s in my mind, and I was like, I'm going to try to choreograph to the dance hall track, and then I'm going to see if it works. Because I was like, well, that kind of makes sense to me. Like, these rhythms really speak to the music that I grew up listening to, and it totally worked. It was like a Sean Paul track, you know, it was like kind of wild. You don't see that exact excerpt here, like the stuff that we did kind of rhythmically with it, but that was a key to me. I was like, oh, this makes sense on not just like an emotional, like visceral level, but also really from that rhythmic base. And of course, all the styles that we're referencing here and that we're doing are styles from the African diaspora. So you've kind of seen the gamut, like Omari obviously is voguing down, and then, but he's also doing all these Orisha dances, right? And you see breaking and hip hop and house, and you're not so much seeing it. You saw a little bit of locking, not so much popping a little bit, but like in the whole show, we're really pulling from all of those forms because they share that same root, and it makes sense. I mean, to me, so hopefully to you, maybe. But yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't feel contradictory in any way.
Right.
Yeah.
And Ephrat, I know when you were at the Pillow, you were really mining the music, mining the rhythms. Can you just talk a little bit about are you a musician at all?
I'm such a wannabe. I played the violin.
Played the violin.
No, I played the violin growing up thanks to my mom.
Our family owned a violin.
No, I practiced a lot. It just got too much. I couldn't do everything. But, you know, maybe in the future. No, but I really feel that. I think I secretly want to be a drummer. But yeah, obviously, again, like, especially when we talk about the forms we're talking about, music drives us and inspires us so much. You know, some people say music can confine you, but I think, and I speak for everyone in my company when I say this, it really frees us. And also this idea of being able to like be a musician or be another layer of instrumentation with your physical body, I think is something that's really interesting. And in the club, we talk about that a lot. Once you like sit in the pocket of whatever the track the DJ is playing, then you can make your own sort of melodic or rhythmic line on top of it, depending on what your quality, you know, you're using. So in that way, I would never call myself a musician, but one day maybe.
I'm glad you mentioned this notion of freedom, because so many points in this piece, it begins in a constraint, and then it just liberates itself, the movement and the music. And I think those swells are really beautiful, and I know we'll see it culminate. I know that you actually picked up the pandeiro, right, as a part of this. Can you talk about why the pandeiro?
That's supposed to be a
secret.
secret.
Tell us, Ehud, maybe tell us what the pandeiro is first.
Well, so pandeiro is the drum. It's that you saw Sergio playing, and also Ranjan was playing. This is a funny thing. So in America, you would say that's a tambourine, but in Portuguese, the tambourine is actually the other little thing that you hit on the head. So.
Tambourine,
yeah, the tambourine. So it's funny, but it's not. It's kind of like that. It's that would be the closest approximation.
Yeah.
But it can do all the rhythmic things, and it can do the bass, and all the different subdivisions, and it's an amazing instrument.
Yeah, I was trying to surprise Ehud and bust out like a pandeiro solo, but we didn't get to it this time. But yeah, because again, my sort of incessant need to understand this music, I was working a lot with Sergio on the pandeiro so that I could understand it, because I didn't. Again, when you're dealing with any kind of cultural form, I think there's a level of sensitivity you need to bring to it so that you're really honoring the people and the communities and the culture. And so I was like, I want to get inside this music so I can really try to understand why, as a B-girl and a house dancer and hip-hop dancer, I feel connected. And it's, of course, that African root, but there's more just like on a level of specificity about the rhythmic structures that are cohesive.
I was going to say, like, the thing that's amazing about Nazareth, and what I wanted to just say is that Ephrat made a really good point, is that some of this, like the first song we played, Moderator, that was kind of our arrangement of it. And then also Odeon was kind of arranged, and so was Apagnetti Cavaquinho, but
wait, tell them which one that
but like the one that was the
last one we just did with
the,
Omari doing
the fast thing at the end. But like some of them, I just play them as they're written. I don't add anything. Well, you're going to see that with the next piece and also the last piece. I just play them as they're written because all the rhythm, the drum parts are in the piano, because Nazareth he was adapting the percussion to the piano, you know, much as in like, if you listen, you know, I would say that about, you know, Scott Joplin or like U.B. Blake or the people who wrote really good ragtime, you know, they're putting the tuba as the bass, and in the middle the chords are the banjo. So it's the same kind of orchestration of other instruments on the piano, so the rhythms are really there already, and so it's really full. So that's why also for me, I've been playing this music a while, and also on the side, I'm kind of working on a recital program of Nazareth. Do you mind if I take this minute to plug myself? And I realized, wow, this music doesn't need to be changed. It's perfect as it is, and that's an amazing compliment to say to a composer, that he was just. It's like it's just these little chestnuts, and he mostly wrote miniatures. All the pieces are between 3 or 6 or 7 minutes long. They're just like these little perfect things, and they're just perfect, and that's incredible. Like to be able to do that all the time, and that comes from that because it's complete. He has his bass parts, he has the drums, and again, the next piece we're going to play, if I may segue, is a really special one, and I think it's one of Nazareth's greatest pieces, because it's a waltz, and you can't help but hear the influence of Chopin. And actually, a funny story is that in I think around 1910.
I think 1918. I know the story you're going to tell.
Oh, this is in 1918, right? So Ernest Schelling, which is a great pianist and composer, took Arthur Rubinstein when he was playing in Rio de Janeiro to meet Nazareth, wow. And Nazareth insisted on playing Chopin for him. And so Schelling was saying, "Man, come on, play your tunes, play your compositions. That's what you have." And he was so in awe of Rubinstein, and of course he loved Chopin so much that he wouldn't do that. So, I find that it's kind of sad, and also is like fitting about this man who wasn't. He didn't know what he was. He wanted to be on the concert stage, but he was playing in theaters and in coffee houses most of the time. So
we should say that is the title of the piece, Odeon. Odeon is a big cinema in Rio where he used to play. So he composed for films, but he also just played in the waiting room, or
played in the lobby.
Yeah, of the theater. So I think also this speaks to this idea of duality. Here's this virtuosic composer who's, so brilliant, but still has to, he's still like a broke artist and still playing.
Pay the rent.
Yeah, he has to pay the rent. So I feel like this idea of things that are just oppositional are everywhere in this work, whether it's putting these forms on stage, whether it's the music itself, whether it's the composer. And I think that is just something that is profoundly interesting to me in life.